Welcome to today's external information session on the revisions process. Thank you for joining us. Over the next hour, we will walk you through recent enhancements to the grant revisions process, explaining what is changing, why it matters, and where you can find the supporting materials to read more about it. We will close with time for your questions. So this slide shows our agenda for today. We'll begin with a brief overview of the revisions process, then move into the three main enhancements, the new budgeting approach, the updated PF visualization, and the measures introduced to reduce administrative burden across the process. After that, we'll recap the key messages, share resources, and conclude with questions and answers. So with that, let's move into the first section, which is the overview of the revisions process. As you can see, revisions is a critical grant life cycle process when we think about it from funding requests to closures. It's what allows us to adjust to the changing context and to the things that come up during implementation. Of key note is that there are 5 different types. These are selected by your country team, and the types depend on what the content of the revision is and have a slightly different process. I think with that, we can go to the next slide. For your information, we do have today's info session in English with the live subtitles in Spanish, and we'll have a follow-up session tomorrow at 3 o'clock Geneva time in French. Okay, so then let's go into the enhancements. If we can go to the next slide, please. Looking at the objectives for change. So why did we make these changes? We had three main reasons. And so the first one was just a response to seeing that we have a lot of mid-cycle needs that have come up recently. You've seen it with the reprioritization, we saw it C19, we have climate and health. And so we just wanted to take a look at the process again and make sure that in terms of policy and system, we have increased flexibility where we could to respond to things that that are yet to be seen. The second main point is reducing admin burden. So looking through the process and seeing where CTs are spending time on things that are not very strategic or value adding, and seeing if we can either reduce that or move it somewhere else or automate it in some way. And finally, it's improving data quality and monitoring. And so that's to allow us to keep good oversight of the end-to-end grant life cycle during our grant management. Next slide, please. Here you have a quick overview, a breakdown of the functionalities that we'll go into step by step in this session. I won't go into it here, but I think now we can pass off to our finance colleagues to talk to you about the new budgeting approach.
Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the session again. So I'm Fadil, I'm the Grant Finance Manager in Western and Central Africa. So I'll be taking you through the new budgeting approach and what it means in terms of budget revision. So as you have seen it already with the new policies that were introduced in February of 2023. So there are no changes now which are being made to Global Fund budgets when there are no changes in terms of the total amount that you have there. So the budget that has been signed remains the budget that is being used. But what are we introducing today are 2 functionalities that will help us streamline, first of all, the revision function. So there are 2 cases that we have here. So one is the incremental detailed budget form, and then second one is the budget adjustment form. So let me just pause here and try to focus on why these 2 changes have been brought in the current context of grant revision. So first of all, it's to streamline and simplify the updates that are being made to the budget. So you as implementers, you know when there are budget revisions, very often what is required of you is to go through the total budget and then change that whole budget over the 3 years completely. And if you are somewhere in, let's say, year 2 of implementation, so very often what you were used to do is to actualize year 1 and then reprogram the different activities into year 2 and year 3. so that it was the whole Excel budget that was being adjusted. So now the new process, as we will show you, is going to simplify and streamline that part of the process. And then what is also very important is that at the time of grant making, so at the time of grant making, so there was some consideration as to why the budget was there, why what was approved at the level of the TRP. But then during the course of implementations, things change. And very often when we do revision as we have been doing it, so that integrity of the original budget against what was initially approved is lost, because the new budget will supersede and will override that original budget that we have. And then in terms of administrative burden, just like you have seen, so it required of you to adjust the whole budget, then upload it into the system and so on. And then when we, from our end, we track financial reporting against the original budget. So there's always issues as to what constituted the original budget, what is the new and amended budget, so that in order to avoid this loss in terms of financial information, so these two new forms have been introduced. Now, when you look at the incremental budget, the incremental detailed budget form compared to the budget adjustment form, if I have to simplify this in very, let's say, common terms, so the incremental detailed budget is being used whenever there is a change to the total budget amount. So let's say you have a budget for 10 million and you have additional funding for 1 million. So that 1 million is where you're going to use the incremental detailed budget form. Now, if you have, let's say, material budget revisions, meaning that you are changing the investments between, let's say, cost inputs or between modules and interventions or even by implementer, but in the absolute, there's no change in terms of the total amount of the budget. So let's say you have a budget of 10 million, and then you're making you're reducing, let's say, your investment in vector control by 1 million and moving that 1 million into case management. So overall, there is no change in the total budget amount, which still remains at 10 million, but there is a change in terms of the module, which moves 1 million less in vector control and 1 million more in case management, if you have a malaria grant, for instance. So then what this means is that we are going to use the new budget adjustment form, which will be a simplified version of how adjustments are to be made. So let's go to the next slide, where we will explain into a little bit more details what we mean by incremental budget, incremental detailed budget form. So, and I think for those of you implementers that have been implementing the C19RM component, this will speak to you because it is the exact same approach that we are doing now. So let's say that at the time of grant making, you have a budget that has been approved. We will call that the baseline budget. Now, if during the course of implementation, you receive funds either from portfolio optimization, either for additional funding that comes from separate donor arrangements and so on. So what will happen is that you will have to do a budget only for the incremental part. So coming back to my example, so if you are given, you have a budget of 10 million and you're given an additional budget of 1 million. So it's not the whole 11 million that you need to cater for. The 10 million remains the same, and it is only the 1 million more that you will need to provide as detailed budget, meaning the assumptions behind them, the classification by activity details, cost input or cost categories, module intervention, implementer, payment currency, and align it to the different years over which the budget is supposed to be used. And how will that translate is that this incremental budget will be added to the baseline budget, and the summary budget that will come out from the system is actually going to be the sum of those two, which will be 11 million. So just to recap, it's the original budget doesn't change. The budget that was agreed at the time of grant making any increase, and in some cases there can be decreases as well, as you have seen was the case for the reprioritization exercise. But in a nutshell, any change to the total budget amount, increase or decrease, has to go through the incremental detailed budget form. Now, if we move to the next slide, when we go to the budget adjustment form, so what it means is actually the total budget amount remains the same, but you are actually changing either interventions, or you're changing cost inputs, or you're changing implementer. So one classic example is at the time of grant making, very often not all the SRs are known into the system. So I'm sure many of you have seen in the budgets SR1, SR2, etc. So now if you have, for example, an SR that is clearly defined, named, and with activities that are properly assigned to it, so you will use the budget adjustment form where, for example, this change for implementers is going to happen. Now, I use already the example of shifting funds from vector control to case management. So that would also be the case of how we are going to use that. So this just gives you an insight as to how it works. So you as PRs, so you will follow your own internal budget review and approval process, meaning that when you have determined that there are savings or you want to reinvest those savings, or there are new priorities that have come in and you need to move additional investments into one category or not. So then, as usual, you will have to determine whether it is a material budget revision or a non-material budget revision. If it is a material budget revision, as defined in the budgeting guidelines, so then what PRs will have to do is to seek agreement from the country team in order to process the budget revision. Because remember that this falls outside of the scope of what PRs are allowed to shift as a result of material budget changes. Now, once you have communicated that, so the Global Fund will provide its written agreement, and then what will happen, both in the case of material and non-material budget, so when adjustments need to be made, so then you as PR, you will have to prepare the budget adjustment form, so which will take the form of a summary budget with adjustment columns for plus and minus for activities and interventions that are receiving the additional funds, and minuses for, of course, the line items that will give out the budget in favor of the new activities or interventions. And then what will happen is that this will be submitted in the system, and the Global Fund will review and approve the budget adjustment form, and this will be the end of the revision. So it's very much streamlined. So I'll pass the floor now for some insights as to how it works in the system. Thank you. Yeah, okay, sorry. So basically what happens in the system is once you are through onto the portal, so you will request access to the form. And how it goes, I'm pretty sure that you all recognize that landing page. So on that landing page, so you will see there is a new section that appears here, which is basically the financial management section. And if we move to the next slide, so what you will see is under the financial management section, so you will have to use the country and IP name to refine your search as to which IP or grant that you are trying to adjust. And then towards the rightmost part, there will be that icon, that paperclip icon, where you can click on it, and then what it will do, it will open the budget adjustment form. And once you open it, there will be a button that appears, which is about generating this budget adjustment form. And how once you click on this, So the budget adjustment form will appear and a working version will appear on the screen. So what it means by working version is that it is something that is at the PR's discretion to amend and to adjust, and it's not submitted form. It's not yet submitted to the Global Fund. So you will see on the next slide. So yes, this one. So what you will need to do is scroll down to the page to access the budget. And just like any normal budget, it is broken by module interventions, cost input, and implementing entities. And all files that you would want to attach can be attached by the way of the Documents tab, just as is the case when you do any reporting or any budget upload in the system. So what you need to do is, if you want to make any adjustment to the budget, so on the bottom rightmost part of the screen, you will see the Add button that is there, and once you click on the Add button, so then you will see that there is a series of information that you will need to provide. So it is by implementing entities, so what are the adjustments that are being made. And on to the next slide. So there you will see that the save changes that are made are reflected on the main page, and they are also listed on the budget adjustment section, so which will appear on your screen as is. Now, once you have next slide, please. So once you have done your adjustment, so you will see that a green field which appears on top, which tells you that the budget adjustment has been successfully saved. So this is a confirmation to you that all the data that you have provided is not lost. And what is also important is to click on the check data quality, because we have embedded a series of controls, like, for example, the budget does not go beyond what has been approved, or the adjustment between the three tables do not match. So these will help you identify whether any errors has happened into the file. Now, when you click sync, okay, when can you go back to the previous one? I just wanted to click. So once you click on sync, and it will refresh everything, and you can pull out the latest information and expenditures that you have, so that you can properly fill in the form. Now, going on to the next part, so the budget adjustment form, it's the same. So it provides the budget broken down by year and by dimensions, and you will see whether there are any errors. Like, for example, we don't only check at the total for the 3 years, but also at individual yearly level, because remember that this is the information that is important, because it gets fed into the different reportings, and also for your own budget monitoring purposes. Next slide, please. So once all the adjustments are made and there are no errors, so you will see that the green tick button which appears to indicate to you that there are no errors from the submissions that have been made. And then you will be able to click on the submit button, which will then send it through to the Global Fund. So once you have submitted that, so the form status will change. So now it is no longer PR to fill in, but it will be Global Fund to review. And one important aspect is that the Global Fund will review and validate the information that you have provided. And once this review is completed by the Global Fund, so the budget adjustment form will be available for you for access in the latest completed section. And then what is important, how do you see that the Global Fund has approved? So the form status will be changed to completed, and there will be a date that will be stamped against it to identify the date on which the completion happened. Now, so once what is also important is that if you want to keep track of the previous versions of the budget, so this is provided in the tab called Archives. So if, for example, there are multiple adjustments that happen during the lifetime of the grant, So this is also going to be available to you so that you can have a quick refresher onto these figures as well. Right, so how do we go about now, and what are the go live versions? So we are targeting to release these as from 11th of December onwards. So both the incremental detailed budget and the budget adjustment form. So the policies will be adjusted and published accordingly. And this is why we are having this information session today, because we wanted to give you an insight as to what are these adjustments, how things are going to be simplified from your end, but also to provide you with some insights as to these two different forms. So if you have to retain something from this, there are two forms now which are applicable for revision. One which is applied in the case of additional or reduced funding, so which is the incremental detailed budget form. And the second one is when you process material or non-material budget revisions. So these are the ones where there's no change in the total budget amount, only changes into the different categories of the three tables. So this is where you will be using the BAF. I'll stop here and hand it over back to you, Patricia. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fadil. And I saw the questions are coming in, so please keep posting them. We'll get to them at the end. Before that, I'll go into the second enhancement we have, which is visualizing the performance framework. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as far as the performance framework, where we want to end up is a fully digitized online performance framework, but it's a huge lift technologically. And so we're doing it in stages. So for the revisions process, what we'll have is a visualization of the PF. So it's still populated in an Excel. The Excel gets attached in the partner portal. And then the data is read and you'll see the data on screen so that you can see exactly which data you're submitting. In the future, and likely for grant making, you'll get the digitized version. Now let's go through, I'll show you a couple of screenshots of what this looks like for you in the portal. So if we go to the next slide, here we have an open and active revision. And if you have a performance framework in that revision, you'll have this tab up top that says performance framework. If it does not exist for that revision, the tab will not be visible. And so in order to make changes to the PF, you would still go to the download revisions form tab like you do now, and download the PF plus any other documents. And if we go to the next screen, you'll see that, so you'll download your Excel PF, make any changes in there, and then come back into this attach and submit revisions form tab to attach your Excel. And as soon as you do that, that data is read. And if you hop over to the performance framework tab, then you'll see the data that you've just attached, and you can visualize the data that you're going to submit. Once you click on the tab, it looks like this. You'll see that the visualization is a bit different than C19. It follows C19, the C19 online PF that we have right now, in its sort of vertical approach. But you have a lot more tabs. So you see the tabs at the top, and it opens on the overview section when you start. If we go to the next slide, you can navigate through the different tabs and expand the sections as needed. And if you need to make any changes, you would again make them at this point in the Excel form and reattach it, and then come back and look here, make sure that your changes have come through before you submit it. If you're ever wondering what is your latest version, especially as we get some revisions that have the PF attached multiple times, whatever is actually visualized under the performance framework tab is considered the latest version and is what will be or was submitted. That's okay, we can go, that was the end. Let's go to the smaller enhancements that we're trying to address the administrative burden. So the first is the ability to make changes to the PF and the budget during an admin revision. This was something that was loudly called for across the organization and also across PRs, just to say that there are some type of changes that shouldn't require the full revisions process because they're minor. And if you see on the left side, you'll have an example of the type of changes that you can make as an administrative change to a performance framework. So things like revising the reporting schedule, updating or adding missing sources of data, correcting or clarifying custom indicator names and other fields, realigning targets to the accumulation type, geographic coverage or scope of targets, and aligning your indicators and targets with measurement guidance and standard indicator definitions. What you're not allowed to do as part of an administrative change is actually change the targets. Similarly, there's a set of rules or a set of changes that are allowed to the baseline budget. And that's when your changes don't change the baseline budget amounts at module, intervention, cost input, or implementer level. If they don't actually bring in actual expenditures from past periods, and if it affects more than 10% of the total IP budget. If your change is smaller than that, we're asking you to wait until you have an amount that's more than 10%. So it can include changes like adding in your subrecipient names, especially in these cases where they're not yet identified during grant making, and correcting any sort of error that is in the descriptive information of the baseline budget. For the next change, we have a revamp of the request forms A and B. So it used to be that when you processed a revision, the PR would need to attach request form A and the CT would attach request form B. So we are retiring request form A, and that's no longer required from the PR. But we are keeping the CCM endorsement. So the CCM endorsement is still to be provided. It can just use the flexibilities that are currently available in the OPN. So it can be provided via email or some other letter. And the CT will take that version and attach it to the revision that they process in GOS. For the CT, just for your awareness, before we go into the next slide, for the CT, request form B is now a pre-populated form that has been made shorter to reduce the content, improve a bit of the efficiency, and also lessen the burden on them of filling that out. Okay. The next two slides I won't go into in detail, as they're more sort of organizing and housekeeping. But just for your awareness, because you will see these label changes in the partner portal, we do have new revision types and subtypes to align with the OPN types and subtypes that you see. So now there's full alignment across the two. And if we go into the next slide, you'll see that there are new file type names. And that's to respond to the new budgeting approach that now has the different file types, your baseline and your incremental budgets. It's also to give you a chance to attach for you and the CTs to attach the mandatory documents that are needed throughout the revision. So in the past, we didn't have all these different types, and if they got attached as sort of an other. And in this way, we can clearly see what's attached to each revision. Next slide, please. Yeah, so let's go into a quick recap of the changes. If you ever want sort of a quick summary of what has changed, this is a good slide because it tells you what the change is and whether it affects the 5 revision types or not. I leave that there for reference. And in the next slide, in the next 2 slides, actually, we have a step-by-step process of these are your end date, additional funding, programmatic, and administrative revisions. It tells you the steps your revision will go through. And these also align with the statuses that you'll see in the partner portal. And on the next slide, you'll see the steps that your budget revisions will go through in the BAF. And these are also shown in the BAF. Okay, as far as resources, so we will share this presentation at the end, so you'll have access to these links. But here is a listing of everything that will give you any sort of information on revision. So a quick summary of changes. You also have your Bibles, as I like to call it there, your operational policy manual with the specific note and procedures on revising grants. The link to this info session. System guidance refers to like step-by-step information on how do you do things in the partner portal. And then a link to the Global Fund website and an email where you can raise requests for support. And I think with that, we can jump into our question and answer session. Give us a minute and we'll get your questions up on the screen. Okay, so for the first question, it says, in the April 2025 communication to PRs that announced reprioritization, it was stated that both material and non-material changes required CT approval until further notice. Is this now being changed, and are we reverting back to the usual practice? Yes, this is correct. So now that most or all the reprioritization revisions have finished, we're reverting back to the standard process with the changes that we're introducing here. And now the PRs can also use the budget flexibilities that they have, ensuring that it's aligned with the OPN and with the budgeting guidelines. Question 2, is this a new approach for budget revisions, and when will implementation commence? As Adil mentioned, we're looking to roll this out as of December 11th, so tomorrow. And if you look back to his slide, there was some nuances about if you've got a revision in progress, whether you continue with the old process or not. Will the materiality assessment be submitted offline first or via the portal? So via the email to the CT for approval, and then you will initiate the process in the portal. Question 4, are there any budget adjustment thresholds? Yes, these are the thresholds that are currently defined in the budgeting guidelines. Is this for any adjustment going forward? It seems we still need approval for non-material adjustments. For non-material revisions, as the guidelines say, PR internal approval processes will be applied. Question 6, who is supposed to fill in the adjustment form, PR or implementer, and direct submit to CT? The budget adjustment form is for the PR to input into, obviously taking their inputs from any implementers where that's necessary. I don't know if Adil or Finance, did you want to add on to any of these? I realize that I'm just going through and most of them are for the BAF. So please stop me if you want to add on.
No, you're spot on the responses. Maybe just as a matter of clarification. So the budget adjustment form, as Patricia said, this is where you're going to have most probably the most question because it is new to the system. But the incremental budget, I don't see many questions relating to that. It's probably because it's just additional budget in the same way that you are used to doing it. And when to question 6 in particular, we know that there are a number of instances where there are pass-through PRs or PRs that act as a fiduciary to implementers. So of course, it is the PR who has access into the portal to make the adjustment, but of course it will have to be with inputs from the implementer. Thanks.
Thanks, Fadil. Let's move on to 7 then. Is it on a mandatory basis to prepare and submit the BAF for non-material adjustments that don't require GF prior written approval? These are optional at your discretion. And I suppose that you can also wait and submit them all together with something that is material. How often can a budget revision be performed anytime during grant implementation? For the BAF, is there any option to download the Excel form and work on it, then upload it back to the portal, similar to the PUPUDR? So it is possible to download an Excel version of your BAF, but it's just a working tool. It doesn't have a data entry function, so it has no function for you to attach and then sort of import the data back into it. Go to next question, please. When do the budget change forms come into effect? Can we use them in GC7 or will be for GC8? So they come into effect tomorrow, and this will apply to both GC7 and future GC8 grants. Question 11, related to the compliance part of the BAF, when the LFA would like to conduct the expense verification, will they consider the version on the budgetary change or the budget version on the grant signing? So if the revision is finalized before the PR receive the reporting forms, the revised budget will be the basis and the LFA will perform the review against that revised budget. Did you want to add on to this one, Fadil?
Yes, so just like is the case now, so any eligibility with respect to budget is assessed against the latest approved budget that we have. So if, for example, the ULFA is conducting the review, and at the same time, a budget revision is still underway and has not been finalized. So it will be the latest version of the budget that the LFA will reference to. So which is why you will have on the portal, as we have seen, archives also where the latest versions of the different budgets are available. But of course, LFAs also work in collaboration with the cities and the PRs. So the best approach always is to clarify with the country team and the LFA which is the correct version of the budget to be used for the purpose of the specific expenditure verification. Thank you.
Thanks, Fadil. Moving on to 12. The question is saying, during the reprioritization process, our grant had minimal budget cuts, but did have change in the grant value, though the CT decided not to go through the full grant revision process, I assume because it was quite minimal. The question then is, can we use this option, assuming the BAF, to update our budget to align with the approved reprioritization package, which has not gone through the IL process? And the answer is yes. I think it's a great case study of where you can use it to have your most updated budget. But you would need to assess that they're material or not, and obviously align the approach with the CT.
Maybe, Patricia, if you allow me, a slight nuance on that. So this is the case where there was a minimal budget cut. So which means that in this case, it's not the BAF that will have to be used, but the incremental budget form, because obviously there's a change in the total amount. But since it was determined at the time of reprioritization that there's no need to completely change the IL, the budget by way of IL. So then what the PR needs to assess is whether, as a result of the reprioritization exercise, there have been shifts that have happened in investments, and then clarify this with the city, because there was a reason why the budget was not revised after all, and if the amount is so minimal that the administrative burden associated with that was not required, so then we're not going to reintroduce the same burden now. So always check with your city; they will have the answer for you on this one. Thanks.
Thank you, Fadil. Oh, great nuance. We have question 13 for somebody in finance. It says in slide 22 on the screenshot, why did the check on year 1 and 3 get an error, but the total did not? Will we expect some glitches in the system?
Yeah. No, it's not the glitches in the system, but there can be compensating errors. Like, for example, you have minus 100,000 on year 1 and plus 100,000 on year 3. So when you bring these all together at the consolidated level, the impact is 0. But then individually by year also, the same principle applies, and these amounts should be correct. So that's why we said that the check that we are doing is not on a total basis, but individually year by year, just like you would do as part of your grant making budget, for instance. So when you fill in the Excel form, when you go onto the summary budget, so there is a check that tells you whether or not the total amount is correct individually and by year as well. So it's to avoid the impact of compensating errors. And one of the classical, let's say, scenarios where you can have it is that you have actualized expenditures for year 1. Let's say you had a budget of 30 million spread as 10 million for each year, but your expenditures were only of 9 million. And when you actualize the budget, so you actualize only for you don't actualize the 10 million of year 1, but what you do is you adjust, let's say, year 2 for 11 million. So although individually they would, although in total they would balance off, but individually by year they are not. So which is why we have that check at yearly level and also at total level. Thanks.
Thanks, Fadil. For the next question, this means then that there will no longer be any ILs for the budget revision process. can all be done through the portal, and all can be done through the portal and will be reflected in the upcoming PUDR once approved. Am I correct? Would you like to take that one also, Fadil?
Yes.
Kick
So
it off.
in terms,
Go on.
if, for example, we are talking about non-material budget, material and non-material budget changes that require the BAF. So it's correct, there is no IL that is needed. But if there are additional funding, so then an IL would be needed because the sign amount is going to change. Now, in terms of whether or not this is going to be reflected in the PUDR, this is still a work in progress at our level, and we'll come back on this one. But right now, there is no linkages between an updated budget and how it gets fed into the PUDR, because remember that we have a budget adjustment that can be made anytime during the year, and that same budget is used for reporting purposes, both for the PU and PUDRs, but it is still a work in progress at our end to see when and how the full effect of that adjustment is going to be taken into consideration in the reporting.
Thanks, Fadil. And if I could maybe add one reminder that the only link that does exist is that you do get expenditure data from the implementation oversight module coming into from your last PDR coming into your BAF. But as Fadil mentioned, the link to go the other way and feed from the BAF into PUDR is coming later. Question 15. For the incremental budget, you said the baseline budget remains as is, and the revision will cater to the incremental budget only. What if the assumptions we have impact the baseline budget as well? For example, if the incremental budget is used to increase the allocation for an existing budget line, this also impacts the assumptions. How should this be handled?
Oh, that's an interesting case, because that is maybe just for simplifying. So incremental budget is how you adjust or how you allocate the additional resources onto the existing priorities that you have. Now, let me go back to my example of 10 plus 1 million. So let's say you have still your baseline budget of 10 million, and then you have an incremental budget of 1 million. So the first step is to make sure that the 11 million are fully signed into the grant, so which is why you will use your incremental budget form. But then once implementation starts, and then you see there is a need for other adjustments, so that's when you can use the BAF, which will then be applied onto the whole of the 11 million. But the baseline budget, the principle remains the same. It's not going to change, but you are more than welcome to reassess after the inclusion of the incremental budget, what is the total impact that you have, and whether or not this may require additional material changes to the budget. I'll take the next one as well, Patricia. For non-material changes, are we not expected to just manage within the module intervention flexibility while keeping the baseline budget? Yes, that is correct, but this is still an opportunity that is provided to you in order to make the adjustment if you deem that this budget is required for your own monitoring purposes. And also, as Patricia said, so if you have accumulation of small, let's say non-material adjustment, and then suddenly there is a need, when you accumulate all these non-material changes together, they suddenly become material. So rather than having to do the process the process in one go with a lot of inputs, so you will still be able to reflect and use the information that has already been provided through the non-material changes, and then it will be easier for you to process the material budget revision. But again, maybe when you will see the form, it will become easier, because we are not here talking about changes to each line item. So what the BAF will give you is the change according to how you see it in your summary budget. So remember, your summary budget has 3 tables. One which is by cost input or cost categories. Second is by module, and then the third one by implementer. So it is at this level that the changes are going to happen and not at individual budget line. And question 17, whether the incremental budget include HR incremental costs for year 2 and year 3 to be part of the path. The question seems a little bit ambiguous, but to be clear on that, incremental budget is only when the total amount of the budget changes. So you have, again, to my example, 1 million of additional funding that needs to be signed in the grant. But if you are providing for, let's say, additional investments in HR without any change in the total budget amount. When I say total budget, is the total envelope that is signed for this grant. So then this will have to be taken care of as part of the path. Thanks.
Thank you, Fadil. Do we have any more last-minute questions? Okay, well, it seems like we have no more questions, so we can close down the session. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and to all the colleagues on the line as well. We'll be sharing the presentation, like I said earlier, and that will also include the link to all the other resources. I wish you a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.